Major Thomas Harlo, a decorated war veteran traveling to speak at a national forum, is quietly bumped from his first-class seat for a VIP passenger. Though he accepts the humiliation without protest, his granddaughter, Captain Emily Harlo, witnesses the injustice and acts swiftly. Her call to a former commander triggers a powerful chain reaction. Within hours, high-ranking officers and soldiers rally to restore his dignity, setting off a moment that leaves the entire aircraft breathless. But what they didn't expect was how this one act of respect would ripple far beyond the cabin, shaking corporate boardrooms and igniting a national conversation. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories that celebrate courage, kindness, and the quiet heroes among us. Share, comment, and be part of a growing community that believes dignity and respect should never go out of style. Was a young flight attendant. Clipboard in hand, her tone brisk, her expression unreadable. "We need that seat for a priority passenger. Please move to the back now." Her words cut through the cabin like cold steel, curt, impersonal, final. Tom blinked once, slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. Instead, he nodded faintly, his eyes holding none of the indignation one might expect, only a weariness shaped by years, by memory, by war. Silently, he reached into his pocket, folded the boarding pass that read 2A, and rose with the quiet grace of a man long accustomed to sacrificing comfort for the sake of others. Each movement was deliberate as he retrieved his bag, careful not to disturb the passengers around him. He turned, limped past the plush first-class seats he'd barely had time to appreciate, and made his way toward the back of the plane, where the seats narrowed and the space closed in. He settled into an aisle seat near the rear, his broad shoulders barely fitting, his legs pressed against the seat in front. He adjusted without complaint. Outside, the engines began to rumble, their rising pitch signaling that takeoff was moments away. Around him, passengers shuffled and murmured, oblivious to the shift that had just occurred. The overhead bins clicked shut. The lights dimmed. The captain's voice crackled overhead. And then, the echo of boots. Sharp, steady, purposeful. A rhythm out of place in the quiet hum of a pre-flight cabin. Heads turned. Whispers rippled like a breeze through tall grass. Down the aisle came a four-star general, uniform impeccable, expression solemn. Behind him, 10 soldiers followed in a straight, reverent line. Their boots moved in unison, their eyes forward. They weren't there for inspection. They weren't there for formality. They had come for one man. And that man was sitting quietly in economy, his cap resting on his knee, one hand still holding the folded boarding pass like it meant something. They stopped beside him. Every conversation fell silent. Every screen paused. Every rustle ceased. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the general extended his hand. "Major Thomas Harlo," he said, voice low but strong. "Sir, we're here for you." Tom looked up, surprised. The general didn't wait for an answer. He nodded once, and 2 soldiers gently reached for Tom's bag. Another offered a hand to help him rise. Murmurs filled the cabin now, confusion mixing with awe. Passengers leaned into the aisles to see what was happening. First class watched in stunned silence as the soldiers slowly walked Tom back up the aisle, not as a displaced man reclaiming a seat, but as a hero being honored. They guided him to the front of the plane, but he didn't sit in 2A. The general had taken that seat and stood waiting, offering it now with an outstretched arm and a quiet, unwavering respect. Tom hesitated, eyes glancing at the general, then at the passengers around him. But the general insisted. "Please, Major," he said, "you've earned more than this." Tom finally sat down, and as he did, something settled over the plane. A hush, a weight, a realization. This man, the one nearly forgotten, quietly displaced, had lived a life defined not by rank or medals, but by integrity, sacrifice, and humility. He was not the kind to demand notice, but in that moment, he reminded every person on board of what true honor looks like. The engines roared to life, and the plane began to move, but no one looked away. Something had changed, not just a seat assignment, but the atmosphere itself. It had become a space where dignity was recognized, where service was seen, and where the past met the present with reverence. Major Thomas Harlo didn't need applause. He didn't want spectacle. But for those who witnessed it, the memory would linger like a lesson written in sky and silence. Here is the rewritten version in American English, closely following the original while expanding naturally with emotional depth, vivid pacing, and smooth storytelling. No detail is skipped or added beyond the original. Rebecca Lang was the flight attendant. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, her hair pulled back into a severe bun, but her smile, though practiced, held a noticeable strain. "Yes, ma'am," Tom replied in a soft voice. "I'm afraid there's been a last-minute adjustment. We're going to need this seat for one of our VIP clients. I'll have to ask you to move to seat 34B in economy." Tom blinked as if trying to make sense of the words, like they were part of some miscommunication. Holding up his ticket, not in protest, but gently, as if confirming reality for himself, he said, "My ticket says 2A. "I understand, sir," Rebecca said, her tone cooling into a more formal register. "But sometimes these things happen. Passengers from our loyalty program take priority." The words didn't sting because of the seat. It wasn't about that. It was the disregard, the casual dismissal. Around him, the tension was palpable. Passengers squirmed awkwardly in their seats. A man in a suit peered over the top of his newspaper. A young couple just behind them fell silent. Tom didn't react with visible anger or complaint. His face was composed, marked only by a deep, quiet weariness. He looked down at the boarding pass again, then carefully folded it and slipped it into the pocket of his shirt. "If that's what needs to be done," he said evenly. Rebecca gave a stiff nod, grateful that the situation hadn't escalated. She gestured to the rear of the plane. Tom rose slowly, gripping the armrest to steady himself as his leg gave a familiar throb of pain, an old injury that still flared at times. He reached for his bag from the overhead and began the long walk down the aisle. He passed rows of wide, plush seats filled with settled travelers. His steps were steady, his posture upright, a soldier's bearing still present after all these years. In economy, Tom found 34B, a cramped middle seat wedged between a teenager lost in his headphones and a man whose elbows unapologetically spilled across the armrest. Tom gently placed his bag beneath the seat in front and lowered himself slowly, suppressing a grimace as his knees struck the hard plastic backing. No one around him said a word, but many had watched. They had watched the quiet older man who had boarded with such dignity be moved aside for someone who had yet to even arrive. They had watched him show no bitterness, no frustration, only that same quiet resilience that had carried him through freezing mountain ranges and dense, humid jungles. Outside the aircraft, the engines began their low-rising hum, preparing for departure. Inside, all seemed routine. But something was about to unfold, something that would cause every head to turn, something that would remind them all what real honor looked like. Captain Emily Harlo had always looked up to her grandfather. As a child, she had grown up hearing his stories, not ones of medals and parades, but of loyalty, of sacrifice, of standing by the person next to you no matter the cost, of doing the right thing even when nobody saw. Those stories had shaped her. They had led her to enlist in the National Guard, and even now, seated several rows behind first class, she carried them with her like a compass. She hadn't heard every word between the attendant and her grandfather, but she didn't need to. The body language said it all. The way the attendant spoke, polite, yes, but firm in that dismissive way. The tight smile, the subtle gesture toward the back, and then her grandfather's nod, the quiet, accepting kind that hid so much beneath it. As he passed by her row, she caught his eye, offering a warm, supportive smile. He returned a small one, but she saw it clearly, that flicker of pain. And not just in the leg. This pain went deeper. Emily stood, stepping out into the aisle. She caught Rebecca Lang's attention. "Excuse me," she said, keeping her voice calm, steady. "That man you just moved, do you know who he is?" Rebecca paused, surprised. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This was a necessary change. We have high-priority clients who—" "I didn't ask about your policies," Emily said, her voice still respectful but no longer soft. "I asked if you know who he is." Rebecca faltered. No, ma'am, I don't." Emily took a breath, her mind racing. Causing a scene wouldn't help anyone, especially not her grandfather. But letting this go? That wasn't an option either. She glanced around. More passengers were watching now. They felt it too. Something wasn't right. Without saying another word, Emily returned to her seat. She pulled out her phone and paused just for a moment. Her grandfather wouldn't want her to make a fuss. He never had. But this wasn't about pride or ego. This was about respect. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the one she needed, Colonel Allan Davis, her former commanding officer, a man who owed his very life to her grandfather's bravery back in Vietnam. She tapped the screen. "Captain Harlo," came the familiar voice on the other end. "Colonel, I need a favor, sir. My grandfather, Major Thomas Harlo, is on this flight. He was moved from his assigned seat in first class. I tried to handle it quietly, but..." The line was silent for a beat. "Say no more, Captain," Davis said, his voice firm and unmistakably sharp. "Give me the flight number. We'll take care of it." As Emily ended the call, a wave of relief swept over her. The wheels had been set in motion now, not of protocol, not of airline policy, but of honor, of loyalty, of quiet justice, the kind that could not and would not be ignored. And as the plane continued to prepare for takeoff, Emily's heart beat with slow, steady certainty. Something was coming, something that would change the course of this flight. Not the route, but the memory of everyone on board. Emily sat rigidly in her seat, fury simmering beneath her composed expression. But it wasn't a hot, volatile rage. It was the cold, steady kind that anchored itself deep in your chest and wouldn't budge. From her position near the front of the plane, she could still see him, Major Thomas Harlo, her grandfather, wedged between two strangers in a cramped economy row near the rear. A man whose presence once filled rooms now folded into a seat, clearly designed without men like him in mind. His back, which had remained ramrod straight through war zones and command tents, slouched just slightly now under the weight of age and indignity. The brim of his faded veteran's cap cast a shadow over his eyes, but Emily didn't need to see them. That one fleeting glance between them as he passed by had said it all. "It's fine, Emily, let it go." But she wouldn't. Her jaw tightened. Her thumb hovered over a contact on her phone, a name she hadn't dared to call in months. Colonel Allan Davis. He wasn't just military brass. He was practically family. A man who owed everything to her grandfather. She pressed the button. He answered on the second ring. His voice came through strong and sure, familiar and grounding even across the invisible space between them. "Captain Harlo." "Colonel, I need a favor." "You name it," Davis replied without a moment's pause. "It's about my grandfather. We're on a flight to D.C. He had a first-class ticket, courtesy of Congress, for the Veterans Forum, but they bumped him to economy, middle seat, gave his spot to some frequent flyer." A brief silence settled over the line. Not uncertainty, no. Emily could feel the shift in his tone as Davis locked into memory. "Your grandfather," Davis said slowly, the words tinged with reverence, "saved my ass in Vietnam, Mekong Delta, 68. We were surrounded, no cover, no hope. I thought that was it. Then Tom Harlo came barreling in, pulled us out. I never forgot. Never will." Emily's breath caught. "They treated him like he was nobody, sir. Like he didn't matter." Davis didn't need more. "What's your flight number? Airline, gate?" She rattled off the information, eyes flicking to the tarmac, where the morning sun glinted off the wingtips. The jet engines throbbed with steady power. The crew busied themselves with final checks. "Sit tight, Captain," Davis said, his voice low, resolved. "We'll handle it. You have my word." The call ended, but Davis didn't stop. He leaned forward, hand already reaching for the secure line on his desk. He dialed a number only a handful of people had, General Samuel Grant's personal line. It rang once. "Davis, what's going on?" "Sam, I need a hand. It's about Major Tom Harlo. Commercial flight, first-class seat revoked, given to some loyalty card holder. He's been crammed into economy like a nobody." No explanation. They embarrassed him. "Sam, we can't let this slide." Grant said nothing at first, but the silence wasn't hesitation. It was focus, calculation. Everyone in their generation knew the name Tom Harlo, a man who never asked for medals but earned every one. The kind of soldier who didn't chase glory. He bled for it. quietly. His story was legend in the circles that still remembered what valor really meant. Tom Harlo, Grant repeated, almost to himself. You mean the same man who dragged my squad out of hell in the Mekong? Yes, that Tom Harlo, the one who gave his entire life to this country, and they treated him like nothing. You didn't even need to ask, Alan, Grant said, already in motion. Give me the airline, the flight number, and gate. I'll take care of it personally. Tell Emily her grandfather is about to remember that America doesn't forget. And just like that, the chain was set in motion. A chain forged decades ago in foxholes and firefights, now reforged through sheer will and reverence. The kind of loyalty no metal could fully capture. Davis wasted no time. As soon as he hung up, Grant was already dialing, already snapping orders to his aide. 10 soldiers were assembled within minutes. Each one had served, some fresh off tours in Iraq or Afghanistan, others bearing the lines and ribbons of long service. Every one of them had heard of Tom Harlo. They understood this wasn't just about a seat on a plane. This was about principle, respect, duty. They suited up in their dress uniforms, every button gleaming, every insignia perfectly placed. Medals polished, boots buffed, collars sharp. They moved with discipline born of battlefields and ceremony alike. Outside, a convoy of dark SUVs waited, engines purring with purpose. At the front, General Grant climbed into the lead vehicle, his face carved in stone, his purpose unwavering. They weren't just going to an airport. They were going to deliver a message. The soldiers moved with a quiet determination. Following closely behind, their minds focused and their silence meaningful. The convoy surged forward toward the airport, headlights blinking just enough to part the way without attracting unnecessary attention. They weren't here to put on a show. As the terminal came into view, those inside slowly took notice. Conversations dimmed, glances turned to stares as the long line of black military vehicles came to a synchronized stop just outside the terminal windows. Passengers, moments before immersed in their screens, drinks, and departure times, now stood frozen, captivated by what was unfolding. The SUV's doors opened all at once, and General Samuel Grant stepped out, composed and commanding, surrounded by 10 soldiers dressed impeccably in formal military uniforms. Their boots struck the ground in unison, a crisp, solemn rhythm that cut through the usual airport noise and drowned out the overhead announcements. Every movement was deliberate. These men weren't just there on orders. They were there out of respect, out of duty, to right a wrong and honor a man who had given everything to his country. With sharp precision, the soldiers formed a line behind General Grant, their expressions resolute, their postures unwavering. Their faces reflected not only discipline, but reverence. They bore not just the responsibility of this mission, but the weight of representing a man whose sacrifice demanded to be seen, acknowledged, and honored. And as they entered the terminal, silence moved with them like a tide. Conversations dissolved into whispers, then faded completely. A mother gently reached for her child's hand, drawing them close. A businessman quietly lowered his briefcase and removed his hat. Airport staff, caught off guard by the sight, instinctively stepped aside, stunned by the presence of something unmistakably larger than routine. At the gate, employees fumbled over their words, their professionalism momentarily overtaken by awe. Unsure whether to intervene or simply stand back and let history pass, they watched as General Grant gave a respectful nod, never pausing his stride. There was nothing more to explain. His intention was crystal clear. The jet bridge groaned softly beneath the disciplined march of boots. Inside the plane, passengers remained unaware, until the first sharp echo of a boot met the floor. It was distinct, intentional, and it split through the quiet hum of the cabin like a signal. Heads turned, conversations ended mid-sentence, earbuds came out, eyes shifted, one after the other, as the gravity of the moment reached every row. General Grant moved forward, measured and calm, his eyes scanning, his steps unfaltering. Behind him, the soldiers followed, a living procession of honor. Passengers instinctively leaned back in their seats, making way for something that felt bigger than themselves. A few clutched their hearts. A child leaned in to whisper, "Who are the soldiers here for?" And then the answer stood before them. Major Thomas Harlo sat quietly in an economy seat, squeezed into the narrow space, his long frame folded uncomfortably, his hat tilted forward, the boarding pass still lightly resting in his hand. His face, creased with time and a lifetime of service, lifted slowly as the footsteps came to a stop in front of him. "Major Harlo," General Grant said, his voice carrying throughout the hushed cabin. "On behalf of the United States Armed Forces, I personally apologize for what happened today. No man who has given so much should ever be made to feel unseen. Please, sir, let us honor you properly." Tom blinked, stunned by the sight, by the gesture, by the weight of respect suddenly before him. He tried to wave it off, his voice quiet. "That's not necessary, General," he said softly. "Really, it's just a seat." But General Grant gently shook his head. His voice remained soft but steady and insistent. "It's not about the seat, sir. It's about what it stands for. Let us do this for you." Two soldiers stepped forward with grace and care, extending their arms. Tom slowly stood, his spine rising straight, his body still carrying the poise of the young officer he once was. Together they walked down the aisle. Not a sound followed them. Every passenger sat motionless, watching. A man who had earlier complained about delays now sat with eyes cast down. A young woman discreetly wiped away a tear. Even a teenager removed his headphones, transfixed by the solemn beauty of the moment. At the front of the aircraft, General Grant turned to gesture toward Seat 2A, an empty seat, but one that had always belonged to Tom. "Your seat, Major," he said, his voice full of reverence. Tom sat down slowly, the wide seat finally giving him the space to stretch, to relax. His back found ease, but it wasn't comfort that settled on him. It was something deeper. Dignity, not restored by leather cushions or legroom, but by the gesture, by the collective respect of strangers, and by the presence of men who had come simply to say, "You matter." The soldier stood tall at attention. General Grant brought his hand to a salute, his eyes locked on Tom, and in that still moment, the cabin understood. They weren't just watching a man be moved to a better seat. They were witnessing honor itself take form. As the soldiers turned and exited the aircraft, one by one their mission fulfilled, the silence inside remained. Not from confusion, but from reverence. The cabin had grown unusually quiet. The typical bustle of final pre-takeoff checks was gone. The idle chatter between passengers, the rhythmic click of seatbelts, the crinkle of magazines, all faded into a hushed stillness. In its place lingered a solemn reverence, silently shared among those who had just witnessed something unforgettable. Those who had seen it happen were changed. A businessman who'd earlier been fuming over the delay now sat in deep contemplation, gazing out the window as if seeing the world differently. A young couple held hands gently, exchanging knowing glances without needing to speak. Even the teenage boy with headphones had pulled them off, watching Major Harlo with a respect he hadn't known he could feel. Tom Harlo sat in his rightful seat now, no longer a subject of debate or protest, but of quiet recognition. He didn't carry any bitterness. There was no trace of smugness or pride. Instead, he sat in peace, content that, on this day, the values he had carried through a lifetime of service had not been forgotten. When the plane finally descended into Washington, D.C., a wave of applause broke out. Not the shallow, perfunctory kind that sometimes follows a rough landing, but something heartfelt. It swelled from a place of shared admiration and sincere gratitude. These people weren't clapping for the pilot, they were clapping for him. Tom rose slowly, the weariness of travel still in his bones, but something lighter in his spirit. As he made his way down the aisle, passengers reached out to shake his hand, to thank him, or simply to offer a nod of deep respect. No longer did they see just an old man shuffling down the aisle. Now they saw the quiet hero he had always been, even if they'd once failed to notice. Waiting at the aircraft door stood Rebecca Lang, the flight attendant whose early mistake had sparked the chain of events that followed. Her usual polished demeanor was gone. Her face had lost its confident glow, replaced now with humility and remorse. "Major Harlo," she said, her voice unsteady, eyes searching his. "I want to apologize. I'm so sorry I didn't recognize who you were." Tom looked at her with a calm but unwavering gaze. "Miss," he said softly, "the problem wasn't that you didn't see who I was. The problem was that you didn't see that anyone, man or woman, uniformed or not, deserves dignity. Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes as the words hit her. "You're right," she whispered. "I promise. I've learned something today that I'll never forget." Tom nodded gently, offering a small, tired smile. Then it was worth it. By the time the plane had landed, the story had already begun to spread. A video taken by one of the passengers showing the military escort, the salute, and Major Harlo's quiet return to first class was making its rounds on every social media platform. Within mere hours, it had racked up hundreds of thousands of views, igniting conversation across the nation. At the Atlantic Frontier Airlines headquarters, CEO Richard Lane stood silently at the tall window of his glass-walled corner office, watching departing aircraft vanish into the sky. Behind him, his assistant Margaret entered, tablet in hand, displaying the video that now dominated headlines. "It's everywhere, Richard," she said gently. "News outlets are reporting it. The comments keep pouring in. People are furious and moved." Lane sighed and rubbed his face, tension in every line of his expression. But when he spoke, there was determination in his tone. "Call a meeting. I want all senior leadership in the boardroom. Immediately." Within the hour, the room was full. The video played on a loop at the front. Executives sat watching it in silence, the gravity of it pressing down on them. "This," Lane said, standing at the head of the table and motioning toward the screen, "is not who we are, and this will never happen again. Effective immediately, I want a new policy. No veteran with a valid ticket of any class will ever be bumped or treated with anything less than full respect on any of our flights. Not just veterans either. This is about basic human dignity." The policy became known as the Harlo Protocol, a formal commitment to honor and protect the dignity of veterans on every flight. It included priority boarding, assistance, and respect as standard practice. Rebecca Lang, determined to make things right, volunteered for a transfer to the airline's training division. There, she began leading onboarding sessions for new flight crew, focused on dignity, service, and the profound lessons she had learned from Major Harlo. Each of her trainings began with the same video. Other airlines took notice. Within just a few months, more than a dozen companies had adopted similar protocols, inspired by the quiet power of a man who had never asked for recognition, but whose character had reminded a country what truly matters. And for Tom Harlo, that was enough. Later, in the grand ceremonial hall of the nation's capital, anticipation buzzed in the air. American flags hung from the walls. Portraits of heroes from generations past watched silently from their frames. Veterans from every major conflict since World War II sat together in places of honor. Each face bore the weathering of experience, some hardened by combat, others softened by memory. Pride and sorrow lived side by side in their expressions. When Major Thomas Harlo stepped onto the stage, the room rose at once in a standing ovation. Yet Tom did not walk like a man chasing applause. He walked the way he always had, steadily, humbly, eyes fixed on his purpose. At the podium, he removed his cap and adjusted the microphone. Holding the cap respectfully in both hands, he began. "Thank you," he said, voice strong yet gentle. The applause gave way to a silence filled with reverence. "I stand before you today, not because of what I did, but because of what so many have done, what so many continue to do." He paused, looking out over the room, eyes resting on the veterans who had fought, endured, and survived. The moment belonged not to him, but to them, and he knew it. The young cadets sat upright in the gallery, eyes fixed on the lawmakers below who had assembled to pay tribute. Tom looked out at them, not just the politicians, but the next generation of service members, and spoke in a tone that was steady, unembellished, and deeply human. "I'm no different from any of you," he said. "I didn't wear this uniform to be praised or to gain privilege. I wore it because I believed in something greater than myself. I believed in the promise of this nation. Not just for those who put on the uniform, but for every citizen who calls this country home." Reaching slowly into his pocket, Tom pulled out a small silver star, its edges worn smooth over the years. He lifted it between his fingers, letting the light flicker off its surface. It wasn't the gleam of the metal that mattered, but the quiet truth it carried. "This medal doesn't make me better than anyone else," he said, his voice soft but unwavering. It's not the medal that matters, it's what it represents. Courage isn't about rushing into gunfire without fear. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it comes at a cost. With deliberate care, he placed the medal on the podium before him, almost like an offering, not to the crowd, but to the ideals it stood for. I don't ask for special treatment because I served, he continued. None of us did it for that. But I do ask this, let us be a nation where no one, whether they wear the uniform or not, is ever made to feel invisible. Let us honor the quiet, often unnoticed dignity of service, whether that service happens in combat or in the daily responsibilities of life. His words lingered in the hush that followed. Let us remember that real strength isn't counted in medals or measured by public applause. It's found in how we treat one another when there's no audience, no spotlight, just a choice. When Tom stepped back from the microphone, the applause that swelled wasn't just an appreciation of him. It echoed for something deeper, for the ideals he had spoken aloud, the values they all believed in, but often left unspoken. In that moment, in that chamber, those values, dignity, sacrifice, unity, felt tangible, shared, and immovable. Major Thomas Harlo never sought applause. He never acted out of desire for attention. The things he did, whether on far-off battlefields, inside quiet classrooms, or through small, unseen gestures, were never for recognition. They were done because he believed it was the right thing to do. His story is a quiet reminder that true heroes rarely announce themselves. They move through our lives unnoticed, until a moment calls upon the rest of us to see clearly what they've always been. What happened on that plane wasn't really about a seat. It wasn't about social class or privilege. It was about human dignity. It asked a larger question. Are we, as a society, willing to pause, just for a moment, and truly see the people who've sacrificed for the freedoms we live with daily? Tom's quiet strength taught us that respect doesn't need a spotlight. It begins in the simple, everyday moments. A held door, an offered chair, an attentive ear. It lives in our choice to acknowledge that behind every aged face, every pair of scuffed boots, every sun-faded veteran's cap, lies a lifetime of stories filled with courage, commitment, and silent sacrifice. Now the responsibility is ours. Let this story be more than a passing moment that stirs your heart for just a few minutes. Let it move you into action. Look around your neighborhood, your workplace, your family. Is there a veteran who could use a warm conversation? A neighbor who has quietly given more than they've taken? Someone who has served others without expecting anything in return? You can start today. Show kindness and respect in your daily interactions, not just to those in uniform, but to anyone who carries themselves with quiet dignity and strength. Share this story. Let it remind others of the enduring values that unite us. Leave a comment below. Tell us your thoughts. Share a mode of gratitude, or honor someone whose quiet heroism made a difference in your life. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to this channel. It helps us continue sharing these powerful stories, stories that prove goodness, courage, and compassion still live and breathe in our communities. We don't need to wait for generals or formal ceremonies to remember what respect truly looks like. We can live it every day in small ways that matter. Together we can choose to honor dignity. Together we can build something better, one act of kindness at a time. Thank you for being here.